Hey, what is going on, everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and I have to say, I love the PSP. This might be my favorite handheld system, and probably my favorite system out there, in all honesty, whether it is this, such as a PSP 2000, or one of these little things right here, like the PSP Go. Absolutely love this system. I love the game library, I love the form factor, I love the modifications that can be done, and of course, I love the modding scene. And I owe a lot to the PSP modding scene. The custom firmware, the homebrew, all the developments that were on here. Really, if I didn't get so far into this, I might not really be going as hard on modding as I do on the channel right here. So you can really thank the PSP scene for my interest in modding. So, of course, with one of my other favorite consoles being the Nintendo Switch, and probably my favorite console right now, like my current day supported one, it was pretty awesome to see that there is some awesome PSP support on there in the form of the PPSSPP emulator. Now, this has been ported over by developer M4XW in two forms. It has been ported over in a RetroArch core, which I did try to utilize a few times when it first came out, and honestly it just didn't work very well for me. But then it also got a standalone release in two different variants, a GL build and a GLES2 build, with the GL build being the recommended one to use and the GLES2 build being recommended to use on more intense games such as the Grand Theft Auto games, and I'll touch up more on that later. But what ended up happening was I decided to give this a shot, and I have to say, even for something that is so far just in beta release, it's pretty awesome so far. It's pretty awesome, I'm not gonna lie, and I can't wait to show you all this. But if you are watching and you want to get the most enjoyment you can and the most accuracy out of this, I'd recommend watching this video at 1080p 60 frames per second. If you can't watch in 1080p, watch in 720p 60 frames per second. That way you could see the most accurate representation of the footage and such in terms of frame rate, because all the footage for this video has been filmed at 60 frames per second. Now, another big thing for the channel here is this is my first Switch modding or homebrew related video, so it looks like we get to bust this thing out. Now, for anybody who's wanting to know how to do this, unfortunately this will not be a tutorial. I just can't really do that because, reasons. Let's just put it at that. But mind you, what we're going to be doing is we're going to have our switch right here. This is a exploitable switch, meaning that we can run the Fuse Jelly exploits on here and run custom firmware. The custom firmware which is recommended for this is going to be Atmosphere. You could also use Cosmos, that's actually what I'm using, but at least use Atmosphere, just some variant of that, and kind of sprinkle whatever you want to on top of it. And then, of course, having the PPSSPP Standalone homebrew copied over. This is going to assume that you already know how to do all that stuff, but even if you want to know how to do it yourself, the resources are out there, it's pretty easy to do, and for a few dollars and some of your time, you can get it set up pretty easily. Just mind you, if you're gonna try any of this, hey, stay safe, more power to you, make backups of your NAND, all that stuff, and don't take this online. Nintendo does not like modded Switches getting online. But getting right into it here, even though I'm not going to be showing how to do this, I do want to show you all an overview and some games that I tried which I thought would be good representations of the system. It was more just some stuff that I grew up playing and I want to try out on the emulator. And the really cool thing about it as well too is when you set up your file structure, it's quite similar to the PSP's and it uses a lot of the same stuff, meaning that I was actually able to grab my save files and even my games off of my PSP and transfer them onto my Switch and use them on the emulator. That's pretty cool. At least to me, that's pretty cool how I could just pull saves from like 2007 and be playing them on here with ease. So now let's go ahead and get into this. Again, thanks to the power of modding and the Nintendo Switch and M4XW, we can now finally take our PSP games and play them on the go. Wait, hold on, I didn't think this one through. We can now finally take our PSP games and display them onto our TV. Well, no, because that was possible on these systems too. Alright, look, what I'm trying to say is Switch, dock, HDMI, PSP games. Let's just get into it, alright? Alright, look, I couldn't keep this a secret, I couldn't hide it. You all have already seen some footage of this, at least in portable mode. But here is Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories. probably my favorite game on the PSP, without a doubt the one that I have the most memories with, and probably the most sentimental, not only due to the fact that this is the game that got me into modding on the PSP, but this is the game that made me want to get a PSP in the first place. But we're not directly talking about the PSP today, we're talking about PSP emulation on the Switch. So first of all, this is going to be one of those few games that is going to need the GLES2 build. Now, if you all notice right here, the game seems to play pretty well. However, there is occasional stutters, like there's just kind of a micro stutter, and just for a very, very small fraction of a second when that happens, the audio cuts out as well too. You're probably not hearing it because I am currently talking over it, but you might be seeing it. And what I'm going to do is whenever I talk over this gameplay a bit, I am going to kind of fade myself out and let the gameplay just show itself here so you all can experience it. But aside from the small just micro stutters here and there, the game seems to work incredibly well, and it seems to be quite playable on PPSSPP Standalone. Now again, make sure you use the GLES2 build. If you use the regular GL build, it's not going to play as well as you're seeing right here. And really the only issue that I'm seeing is the micro stuttering that happens, every few seconds. Now, granted, I am pushing the game to its limits. I am using a modified save here, and I am flying around, as you can see, in this helicopter, which is going to stress out the game. So anything you're seeing in regards to, popping and such, that's a fault of the game itself because I'm really pushing it, but even under regular playing circumstances, you're going to be experiencing that same kind of micro stuttering. I guess that's what you can call it. Either way, so far, as long as you use the GLES2 build with the Grand Theft Auto games, Liberty City Stories plays great as long as you can excuse the little micro stutter or hiccup that will happen. Next up, I couldn't just show Liberty City Stories, I also had to show Vice City Stories because I'm sure this game gets a lot of love. Now, I personally liked Liberty City Stories a bit more, but mind you, we're still going to be showing this on here. And there's not too much else to say aside from what I've already said on Liberty City Stories. With the time I have played with this using the emulator, the performance seems to be about the same using GLES2, if not just a tad bit better, but you're still going to run into that little hiccup or micro stutter, so to speak. I'll go ahead and show you all some gameplay here. Alright, I had to show some love to this, and let's clean up after the back-to-back M-rated games, okay? Here we got Loco Roco, which was originally advertised as the happiest game out there. At least I might be paraphrasing, but still it was advertised to be extremely happy, extremely joyous, and every time I play this game, every time I even see it, I get happy watching this. The music is great, the colors are great, the the concept is just amazing. I absolutely love playing this game, and if I can find a reason and an excuse to play it on here, then hey, I'll take it. What can I say about the performance? This game plays perfectly to me. I don't have anything I can complain about. It really runs at a solid 60 frames per second. It looks great, it sounds great. I didn't run into any issues on the levels that I played. I'll go ahead and show this to you all as well. Alright, let's talk about Wipeout Pure at this point. Wipeout Pure is a great launch title that came out with the PSP. Now, I did not pick up the PSP on launch, unfortunately. I was jealous of some people who did. But even to this day, you can tell this is a good launch title because it still holds up really well. And I even prefer to play this as opposed to the sequel that we end up getting later on, which is why I'm playing it here. If you own a PSP and you have not played this game, you're doing yourself a disservice. Please pick it up when you can. It's quite cheap to get, but I'm not trying to sell you a copy of this game. I'm trying to show you how it plays on the emulator. And how is it? Well, it's pretty good. It's not perfect. I did notice there were some frame rate drops and there was some performance issues here and there. It's nothing that's game-breaking, mind you, but you do have a little bit of that hiccup or little micro stutter at times, kind of like what we saw in Grand Theft Auto. But the other added thing that I noticed is that there is some audio crackling at points as well too. When I stop talking and I just let the game play, you all will probably hear it a few times. But those are about the only things I'm noticing, so frame rate isn't consistent, there are some more audio glitches here, but the game is quite playable in this state.
Disruption point.
Now, if you're like me and you can't wait for that Medieval remake to come out for the PS4 later this year, don't worry, we have Medieval Resurrection. And I just want to say, although the cutscenes look awful since they're super compressed and then blown up on here, the in-game stuff looks amazing. This is one of those games I was actually astounded at how good it looked and how clean it ended up displaying on here. Just look at the intro sequence. It looks incredible. Now, when I was playing through the game, unfortunately, I'm not sure. I even tried to go back to it a few times, and I was trying to mess around with the camera because the camera just seems to be a bit too close to Sir Dan. I'm not sure what's going on there. But aside from that, gameplay-wise, it handles extremely well. Any issues I could think of, when going back and checking this out, there are kind of some little audio pops, but I didn't seem to notice anything with performance, and again, I was just awestruck at how nice this game looks on here. I would definitely recommend giving this a try, whether or not you're playing it on an emulator. Daxter. Here's another game that I of course had to cover and go back to. Performance on this seems to be pretty solid. I really didn't notice any issues in regards to this, so this is quite playable through the emulator here. Now I figured if I'm going to put something Final Fantasy on here, I should go with something like Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, a PSP exclusive and a great game at that. Now I have to say this is another game that utterly awestruck me at how great it looked running through PPSSPP. And I was shocked. I had to look this up and double check that this is a PSP exclusive. So you can really only get this on the PSP, or if you're going to emulate it through a PSP emulator. This here looks like something that could be just repackaged and sold on the PS4 storefront. So I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't been ported to anything else. But either way, it looks great. It plays real well. I don't have any complaints on this. Awesome job. Got him. The end. Got him. Conflict resolved. Now what's the best way to follow up some Final Fantasy? Well, how about some more Final Fantasy? Here we have Dissidia Final Fantasy, another PSP exclusive. And just like the previous one, what can I say? It looks good, it plays well, I really didn't have any complaints about this. Sorry if this is kind of a short comment here, but I was just astounded at how well this played as well too.
You have much to learn.
I swear if I didn't put a God of War game on here, I knew I was going to get slapped. So I decided to put God of War Ghost of Sparta. And I have to say, even though this video has mostly been positive, here's where some of the sad stuff starts to happen. So up until this point, I've been using the GL build of this, aside from Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories and Vice City Stories. And I decided to use the GL build for God of War, the Ghost of Sparta. And what you're looking at, I'm going to show you all a little bit here, but this is what it's looking like. And as you can see, it is extremely slow and quite rough. So that GL build does not work all too well. However, the nice thing was I was able to make a save state of this. Save states are compatible across both builds, and then I loaded in that save state using the GLES2 build, and it did seem to improve. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say this is very playable. It is slow in performance, and playing it in the GLES2 build is better, but this is one of those games where it does have a decent way to go. So if you want to play the God of War games here on PPSSPP on the Switch, I'd recommend holding off a little bit. But if you absolutely have to, use the GLES2 build. The rest of the footage you're going to see here is from the GLES2 build. Now let's go ahead and do one more game so we can have a nice even 10 games for this showcase. And I decided to finish it off with one of my favorite games on the PSP, Infected. I absolutely love the soundtrack, I love this game, but unfortunately it does not play very well so far. Now this wasn't ever the most refined game, mind you, but I just want to show you all how slow the menus are. And I also want to show you all the gameplay, and thankfully the gameplay is better than the menus. I was most surprised that the menus are just so slow, but either way, the game is about the same playability-wise as God of War, maybe even a little bit worse. And this was using the GLES2 build because the GL build was worse in performance for this game. Cutscenes seem to be fine, menus are the worst, funny, that's the one that takes the biggest hit, and the gameplay, you're going to see it right here. I'd encourage you all to play it if this looks at all interesting, and I did finish this level here, but it's rough. Alright, so I did say that we're done with games, but we're not quite finished yet. Remember how earlier in the video I said that the folder structures are pretty much the same or quite similar compared to the actual PSP and the emulator? Well, that also includes bringing over Homebrew, since I was able to bring over my games and my save data. And Homebrew actually worked. Kinda. As you can see, PSP Filer works on here just fine. And the only other emulator I was able to get to even boot is Pico Drive, and I can't even navigate this thing really. I don't know what's going on. PSP Filer seems to work. It is a little confusing because PSP Filer itself is confusing, and couple that with the fact that I don't understand completely how to switch and remap buttons compared to, that's my own fault, alright? That's my own fault. When it comes to Pico Drive though, I get it to launch, that's about it, really couldn't do anything of use. And aside from that, the other 4 emulators I had would either crash the app itself, or an error would come up from the application saying that the file was corrupted in some way. So there's not too much else we can do. So when it comes to true Homebrew, yeah, that seems to work. But when it comes to PSP emulators on the PSP emulator, not really good to try it. And this was on both builds, the GL and the GLES builds, by the way. And with this app crash, I think this is a good time to end the video. I think we're good. So that's about it. Hopefully you all enjoyed this overview on here, and look, I know there's going to be certain games that people are going to say, how could you make this video and not show this game, or this game, or this game? Look, it's not that serious, alright? I just took some of the games I already had on my PSP, games that I had some nostalgia and love for, that I played a decent amount of hours on, and I want to try out on the emulator, and I think they were some games that most people have played. But that's really the beauty of the PSP's library as well, too. Really, no matter what I would have picked for this showcase, there's going to be games that people will feel like will be left out because there's just so many iconic games, so many good games on the system to play around with. Now, if you liked what you saw and you want to see some more improvements, or if you're wanting to help support the developer directly and get some more, some more momentum going on this to, again, get some more improvements and get some more updates and all that going, just full disclosure here, I've never personally spoken with M4XW. I doubt M4XW knows who I am, but I will tell you how you can support them directly. Down below in the description, I'm going to have a link to M4XW's Patreon. From there, you can pay them however much you want to per month, and from what I understand, if you support them on Patreon, you are able to get builds of new Homebrew and new developments a few weeks earlier than the general public releases. So if you want to get your hands on some stuff like this a little bit earlier, but you also want to help directly fund the development, go over to Patreon, support M4XW on there, and hey, maybe even say that I sent you. You don't have to, but if you want to, awesome. It doesn't matter to me. As long as stuff like this continues to get worked on and there's momentum from the developers, that's what makes me happy. Anyways, this is Mr. Mario signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, a like would be appreciated. If you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well, too.